Ethan Parker was on his knees in the middle of the parking lot, his hands trembling, his heart beating so hard it felt like it might burst from his chest. Dozens of eyes watched him as if he were already guilty, already condemned, already finished. The store manager pointed at him with shaking anger, shouting accusations that cut deeper than knives. "This is the man who stole the money," he screamed. And in that moment, Ethan realized his life was about to collapse in ways he could never imagine, because everything was about to change in the worst possible way. His 7-year-old daughter, Lily, stood a few feet away, gripping her pink backpack with both hands, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. She didn't understand what was happening, only that people were yelling at her father and calling him a criminal. Ethan tried to speak, but his voice disappeared in his throat. His chest tightened as shame and panic flooded his body at once. And deep down, he knew this scene would follow them forever, because nothing would ever be the same again. The police sirens grew louder in the distance, and every passing second felt heavier than the last. The crowd kept growing, their whispers turning into judgments, their phones recording everything. Ethan searched their faces for mercy, for someone who believed him, but all he could see was suspicion. He felt smaller with every stare, more powerless with every second. And then, a black luxury car slowly pulled into the parking lot across the street, unnoticed by almost everyone. For now. Ethan had no idea that the person inside that car was watching everything with an intensity that didn't match the scene. While the crowd saw a thief, that mysterious observer saw something else. Something that didn't fit. Something that felt deeply wrong. As the sirens approached, the car's engine remained running, waiting, silent and patient. And at that moment, an invisible thread of fate was being pulled tighter than ever. The store manager pushed Ethan harder to the ground, shouting for the cops to hurry. Lily let out a small, terrified cry that pierced straight through Ethan's soul. He tried to reach for her, but rough hands held him back. His heart broke in a way he didn't think was possible. He wasn't just being accused, he was being erased as a father, as a man, as a human being. And what happened next would shock everyone who witnessed it. The black car's door finally opened. A woman stepped out, her heels echoing sharply against the pavement. Her presence didn't fit the chaos. She was calm, composed, powerful. No one knew her name yet. No one knew her story. But her eyes locked onto Ethan with unsettling certainty. For a brief second, their gazes met across the crowd. And in that second, something unexplainable passed between them, because destiny had just entered the scene. Every day before that moment had been a quiet battle for survival for Ethan Parker. He woke up at 4:30 a.m. in a tiny apartment on the south side of Phoenix, Arizona, long before the sun appeared. The alarm clock was old, cracked, and unreliable, but he never needed it. Exhaustion lived permanently inside his bones. He dressed quietly so as not to wake Lily, prepared a simple breakfast with what little food remained, and left for work while the city still slept, unaware of his silent sacrifices. Ethan worked as a stock clerk at a large retail store across town. The pay was barely enough to cover rent, utilities, and Lily's school expenses. Every shift felt endless, his back aching from lifting boxes all day, his hands rough and bruised. His coworkers rarely spoke to him beyond basic instructions. To them, he was invisible, replaceable, just another tired man in a faded uniform. And yet, he endured it all without complaint, carrying a weight no one else saw at noon. While others took breaks laughing and scrolling through their phones, Ethan usually sat alone behind the building with a packed sandwich Lily had helped prepare the night before. Peanut butter, a crooked layer of jelly, and a note written in messy handwriting that always said, "I love you, Daddy." Those notes were the only moments of light in his dark routine. They reminded him why he kept going when his legs wanted to give up. After work, he rushed to pick Lily up from her after-school program, apologizing every time he was even a few minutes late. She never complained. She simply hugged him with all her strength, as if she feared he might disappear. And that fear wasn't unreasonable. Ever since her mother died 2 years earlier, Lily had learned, far too young, that life could take everything away without warning, and that thought haunted them both in silence. At home, Ethan cooked simple dinners, helped with homework, and listened as Lily told stories about her day with forced smiles and hidden tiredness. When she fell asleep, he stayed awake calculating bills on a notepad, knowing the numbers would never truly add up. Sometimes the power went out for hours. Sometimes the fridge stood almost empty. But he never let Lily see despair on his face, because he refused to let her world become as broken as his felt. And every night, before he allowed exhaustion to claim him, Ethan stood by the window and stared at the city lights in the distance. He made the same promise in whispering silence. That one day, somehow, his daughter would never have to live like this again. He didn't know how. He didn't know when. But he clung to that promise like his very life depended on it. Because maybe it did. 2 years earlier, Ethan's life had looked completely different. He had a modest but stable job as a delivery supervisor, a small house in Mesa, and a wife named Sarah who filled their home with warmth and laughter. She had a soft voice, tired eyes, and a way of making ordinary moments feel sacred. Lily had been just 5 years old, still afraid of the dark, still innocent enough to believe her parents could protect her from everything. And for a while, they truly believed they could. Then one rainy night changed everything. A drunk driver ran a red light at full speed. By the time Ethan reached the hospital, Sarah was already gone. There was no goodbye, no last words, no chance for closure. Just silence where love used to be. In one night, Ethan became a widower, a single father, and a broken man all at once. And the world never stopped for him to catch up with his grief. Medical bills swallowed their savings within months. Depression slowly stole his strength. He lost his better job after missing too many days while trying to hold his shattered family together. Friends drifted away. Some offered support at first, then disappeared when the pain didn't fade quickly enough. And through it all, Ethan pretended to be strong because Lily needed him to be. But at night, alone in the dark, he cried in ways he never thought possible. He never spoke to Lily about the true depth of his suffering. He tried to shield her from it, pretending that everything would be okay. But children feel pain differently, quietly, deeply, without words. Lily stopped asking when her mother would come back. She stopped drawing family pictures with 4 people. She started watching his face far too closely for her age, as if she feared he might vanish too. And that silent fear tore Ethan apart every single day. Sometimes, while washing dishes late at night, memories ambushed him without warning. Sarah laughing in the kitchen, her hand on his shoulder, her voice calling his name. Those moments crushed the air from his lungs. He had learned to breathe through the pain without making a sound, but the ache never faded. It simply burrowed deeper, becoming part of who he was. And no one around him ever truly knew the weight he carried inside. Ethan often wondered if his life had already ended that night at the intersection and whether everything afterward was just survival on borrowed time. Yet every morning, Lily's small voice pulled him back from the edge. She was the only reason he still chose to stand instead of fall. And that fragile balance between grief and love was all that kept him moving forward into an uncertain tomorrow. In the days leading up to the accusation, subtle things began to feel off around Ethan. At work, he noticed unfamiliar faces watching him from across the warehouse, whispering when he passed by. The store manager, Mr. Collins, began hovering near his station more than usual, asking strange questions about inventory and delivery logs. Nothing overt, nothing concrete, just small disturbances that made the air feel heavier each day. One afternoon, Ethan found a box labeled with his name placed in the wrong storage aisle. Inside were electronics he had never handled before. He immediately reported it to his supervisor, who dismissed it as a simple mistake and told him to return it where it belonged. But the unease didn't fade. It only grew stronger, like an invisible storm gathering strength behind clear skies. At home, Lily mentioned seeing a strange woman outside their apartment building on 2 separate evenings. The woman never approached, never spoke. She simply stood across the street as if waiting for something. Ethan assumed it was nothing more than coincidence, a passerby, or perhaps Lily's imagination shaped by anxiety. But a quiet chill crept into his spine that night, one he couldn't explain. Even his dreams began to change. He started waking up in cold sweats, heart racing, with the same recurring image burned into his mind. Flashing lights, loud voices, Lily crying, and his own voice screaming for help that never seemed to come. He tried to shake it off as stress. After all, his life was nothing but stress lately. Still, the dreams felt different, like warnings. At work, a coworker he barely knew whispered to him once, "Be careful, man," before walking away without explanation. Ethan wanted to ask what he meant, but the man vanished into the crowd before he could respond. That single sentence echoed in his mind for the rest of the week, growing louder with every strange incident that followed. By the time the day of the accusation arrived, Ethan felt as though he were walking towards something unavoidable. He didn't know what it was, only that the weight in his chest had never felt so heavy. And when he stepped into work that morning, he had no idea that the smallest details he had ignored were about to explode into a nightmare that would change everything forever. The day everything collapsed began like any other. Ethan walked Lily to the bus stop before sunrise, kissed her forehead, and told her to be brave at school. She smiled and waved as the bus pulled away, unaware that it would be one of the last normal moments of their lives for a long time. As he watched the bus disappear down the street, a strange feeling settled in his chest. A quiet sense of goodbye he didn't understand at the time. On his way to work, he stopped at a nearby gas station for a cheap cup of coffee. That's when he noticed her for the first time. A woman stood near the far pump beside a black luxury car that didn't belong in that neighborhood. She wore dark sunglasses, an elegant jacket, and an expression of calm that seemed completely out of place. When she turned her head slightly, their eyes met for less than a second, and his heart skipped for reasons he couldn't explain. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She simply observed him as if he were part of a puzzle she had been studying for a long time. Ethan looked away first, uncomfortable with the intensity of her gaze. By the time he glanced back again, she was gone. The pump stood empty. The car had vanished. And yet, the unsettling familiarity of that moment stayed with him all the way to work hours later. As the accusations unfolded in the parking lot and panic consumed every part of him, Ethan would suddenly remember her face. In the chaos of his arrest, the screaming, the humiliation, the terror in Lily's eyes, his mind would inexplicably return to that silent gaze at the gas station. And only much later would he understand that it was not coincidence at all. Because that woman was not a stranger. She was the key to everything that was about to happen. And at that exact moment, as the sirens closed in and the world turned its back on him, she was already making a decision that would destroy lies, or destroy him first. Ethan tried to convince himself that survival required emotional distance now more than ever. After the strange looks at work, the unsettling warning, and the woman at the gas station, his instincts screamed for caution. He had Lily to protect, bills stacking higher than hope, and absolutely no margin for risk. So when a shivering homeless man approached him outside the store that afternoon asking for help unloading a few bags in exchange for a few dollars, Ethan's first reaction was fear, not compassion, and that terrified him. The man's clothes were soaked from the light rain, his hands trembling as he tried to speak clearly. Ethan remembered how quickly kindness had vanished from his own life after Sarah's death. Still, he stepped back, scanning the surroundings, afraid of traps he couldn't see. He muttered an apology and turned away, feeling an unexpected heaviness settle in his chest. His reflection in the store's glass door looked older than his years, and that realization pierced him with shame. Inside the warehouse, his hands moved on autopilot while his mind replayed the stranger's eyes. Not aggressive, not manipulative, just tired. The same exhaustion Ethan saw in himself every morning. A deep unease grew inside him as he worked, as if he had ignored something important, something meaningful. Yet fear had already spoken first, and the damage was done, or so he believed. At home that night, Lily noticed the change in him immediately. She watched him silently as he reheated leftovers, her small eyes filled with quiet concern. When she asked if everything was okay, he forced a smile that barely convinced even himself. Children feel truth even when words lie, and that invisible tension wrapped around their tiny apartment like a silent storm, waiting to break. Later, as Lily slept, Ethan sat alone on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall where Sarah's last photo still hung. Guilt began to whisper inside him, not just for surviving when she hadn't, but for who he was becoming under the weight of poverty and fear. He clenched his fists as if he could physically hold himself together, but the cracks were already spreading. The warning from his coworker echoed again in his mind. Be careful, man. Be careful of what? Of whom? Of kindness itself? Ethan didn't know anymore. He only knew that every choice now felt dangerous, even the ones that once came naturally. And somewhere deep inside, destiny was already shifting its weight toward him. The next morning, fate placed the same homeless man directly in front of Ethan's path again. This time, the man was collapsed on the curb near the bus stop, coughing violently, struggling to breathe between each painful sound. People walked past without stopping. Some turned away. Others tightened their grip on their bags. Ethan froze in place, his heart pounding as two voices battled inside him. Fear and conscience. For a long moment, he did nothing. He thought of Lily. He thought of the strange warnings. He thought of how fragile his already broken life was. Then he saw the man's eyes again. Not begging, not threatening, just empty with exhaustion. And something inside Ethan finally broke. He stepped forward, knelt down, and gently placed a hand on the man's shoulder, ignoring every instinct screaming at him to run. Ethan bought him water, a sandwich, and used the last emergency cash he had saved for Lily's school supplies to call for an ambulance when the man's condition worsened. While they waited, the stranger whispered broken words of gratitude, barely audible through labored breaths. Ethan felt both fear and strange peace twisting together inside his chest, unsure which emotion was winning. When the ambulance arrived, the paramedics asked for the man's name. He hesitated before answering, as if revealing it carried unseen weight. Marcus, he said. Ethan repeated the name quietly, committing it to memory for reasons he couldn't explain. As the doors closed and the sirens faded, he stood alone on the sidewalk, shaken, poor, and strangely lighter than he had felt in months. Later that day at work, his supervisor questioned why he arrived late. Ethan explained the situation honestly, his voice calm, his conscience clear. The supervisor listened without expression, simply nodding before walking away. But from across the warehouse, Mr. Collins watched the exchange with cold, calculating eyes that held no sympathy at all. That night, Ethan told Lily about helping a sick man. Her face lit up with pride as she hugged him tightly. Mom would be happy, she whispered. Those words shattered and rebuilt him in the same second. And although he didn't know it yet, that single decision had just placed him directly in the path of the coming disaster. The first consequence came faster than Ethan ever imagined. The very next day, inventory numbers were suddenly off by thousands of dollars in missing electronics. Mr. Collins stormed through the warehouse shouting orders, demanding explanations. Security footage was reviewed. Employees were questioned one by one. Anxiety spread like poison through every aisle, and Ethan felt the weight of unseen eyes settling on him with growing intensity. When it was his turn to be questioned, the manager's tone shifted from procedural to accusatory without warning. The questions were sharp, leading, and designed to corner him. Ethan answered truthfully, unaware that truth meant nothing when a narrative had already been written. Every word he spoke seemed to tighten the invisible rope around his neck. Later that day, two coworkers subtly moved their lockers away from his. Conversations stopped when he entered rooms. Eyes followed him, whispers thickened, and for the first time since Sarah's death, Ethan felt something worse than grief. He felt hunted. The warehouse that once merely exhausted him now suffocated him with suspicion. On his break, he stepped outside and found the same empty feeling waiting for him. The sky was clear, cruelly peaceful. He pulled Lily's lunch note from his pocket and read it 3 times, as if hoping it could shield him from whatever was approaching. But even that small light felt distant now, fading behind a wall he couldn't climb. When his shift finally ended, a security guard approached him and informed him that his bag would be searched as a precaution. Ethan agreed without hesitation. It was empty. Nothing was found. The guard apologized quietly, but the damage was already done. From that moment on, Ethan was no longer just another tired worker. He was a suspect, and as he walked home under the dim streetlights that night, every shadow looked like an accusation. Every passing car sounded like a warning. He had no idea how quickly those shadows would turn into handcuffs. The following morning, the collapse became official. Ethan was called into the manager's office before his shift even started. 2 police officers stood inside when he opened the door. The air felt thick, heavy, hostile. Mr. Collins slid printed security images across the desk without a word. Grainy footage showed a man in a uniform moving boxes near the electronics section after hours. The face was distorted by shadow, but the uniform patch matched Ethan's. Ethan's breath vanished from his lungs. He tried to explain that dozens of employees wore identical uniforms, that the footage proved nothing. But the officers exchanged glances that said their decision was already made. Every word Ethan spoke sounded defensive, suspicious, guilty. Even to his own ears, the truth didn't matter anymore. Optics did. Outside, word spread like wildfire. Employees gathered by the windows. Phones came out. Whispers turned into murmurs. Murmurs turned into judgment. By the time the officers escorted Ethan through the main doors, the crowd had formed on its own, as if summoned by the promise of scandal. And standing at the edge of it all was Lily, arriving early for a school event, unknowingly stepping into a nightmare. Ethan saw her too late. The officers tightened their grip as he gasped her name. Lily dropped her backpack, frozen, watching her father surrounded by uniforms and strangers. Confusion shattered into fear in her eyes. And in that instant, Ethan felt his entire world cracking at its foundation. The employer he had broken his back for didn't defend him. The coworkers he had shared shifts with didn't speak. The city that never noticed him before now stared with accusation. Everything he had left, dignity, stability, hope, began to fall apart in full public view, and somewhere across the street, behind a tinted window, unseen eyes observed the collapse with unblinking precision. The accusations exploded in the open parking lot like a controlled execution. Mr. Collins shouted loud enough for everyone to hear, naming Ethan as the thief, detailing the supposed evidence with dramatic exaggeration. Each word stabbed deeper than the last. Ethan tried to speak, to shout the truth, to reach for Lily, but every movement was restrained by authority now. Phones recorded from every angle. Strangers broadcast his worst moment to the world without knowing his name or his pain. Comments were typed before facts were known. Judgment spread faster than any explanation ever could. Ethan felt stripped not only of freedom, but of humanity itself. He was no longer a man in their eyes. He was content. Lily's small voice broke through the noise as she screamed for her father. That single sound shattered what remained of Ethan's heart. He fought against the officers just to reach her, not to escape, not to resist arrest, only to hold his daughter one last time before the world took him away. But he was held inches from her, powerless. And that was when the black luxury car slowly pulled into view again. Calm, silent, watching. The same woman stepped out, observing everything with eyes that held neither shock nor chaos, only understanding. As the crowd continued its cruelty, she crossed the street with deliberate steps, her presence shifting the air around her. Ethan didn't know who she was. He didn't know why she was there. He only knew that in the deepest humiliation of his life, when every door seemed to slam at once, a single unknown figure had entered the scene with intentions no one could yet imagine. And at that moment, everything truly began to change. As the police tightened their hold on Ethan, the woman from the black luxury car finally stepped between the crowd and the officers. Her presence was commanding without being loud. She raised a single hand, and even in the chaos, something about her gesture demanded attention. Conversations faltered. Phones hesitated mid-recording. And for a brief second, the entire parking lot seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Collins scoffed at her interruption, demanding to know who she thought she was. She removed her sunglasses slowly, revealing eyes that were calm yet piercing. "Someone who knows this man is innocent," she said with quiet certainty. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. The crowd reacted with disbelief and mockery. To them, she was just another stranger chasing drama. But Ethan felt something different surge through his chest. Their eyes met again. This time, he saw no judgment in her gaze, only recognition, as if she had seen him long before this moment, as if she had been waiting. His heart pounded harder than it had all day. Who was she? Why would she risk stepping into this nightmare for a man the entire world now believed was a criminal? Mr. Collins quickly dismissed her words, calling for the officers to remove Ethan immediately. The woman didn't argue. She simply said one thing before stepping back into the crowd. This story isn't over. And as her black car disappeared down the street once more, those words echoed in Ethan's mind with dangerous intensity. As the police pushed him toward their vehicle, Ethan realized he had just crossed paths with someone who would either destroy him completely or save everything he had left. At the police station, reality warped into something unreal. Bright fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Ethan was questioned for hours. The same questions repeated, twisted from different angles, as if they were searching not for truth, but for cracks. The officers were professional but distant. The assumption of guilt hovered between every word. Ethan answered everything calmly, despite the terror clawing through him. He explained his schedule, his routine, his poverty, even the humiliating details of his life. But the more honest he was, the smaller he felt. It was as if his struggle itself was being used as evidence against him. Poor, exhausted, desperate, all the perfect ingredients for guilt. Meanwhile, Lily sat alone in a child services office, confused, crying quietly into a borrowed blanket. She didn't know where her father was. She didn't know if he was coming back. All she knew was that strangers had taken him away, and her world had shattered without warning, and that invisible suffering was happening at the exact same time as his. Back at the station, Ethan was informed that he was being formally charged with theft pending further investigation. The words hit him harder than any blow. Charged, criminal, suspect, each label wrapped tighter around his chest. He asked about Lily, his voice breaking for the first time. The officer avoided his eyes before answering, and that silence said everything. And in the shadows of the building, unseen by everyone inside, the mysterious woman observed the station with cold focus, already pulling invisible strings that would soon set the city on edge. Late that night, Ethan was suddenly informed that he would be released on temporary bail while the investigation continued. No explanation, no justification, just a sudden shift in direction. The officer who unlocked his cell wouldn't meet his eyes. Confusion replaced fear as disbelief took hold. When he stepped outside into the cool Arizona night, his legs trembled as if they could no longer support him. The air smelled different. Freedom felt unreal. Then he saw her again, standing beside the black car, phone in hand, speaking quietly before ending the call. She looked at him once, nodded slightly, then got into the car and drove away without another word. Ethan was reunited with Lily soon after. She ran into his arms sobbing, clinging to his shirt as if letting go might erase him forever. He held her with everything he had left in his body, whispering over and over that he wasn't going anywhere. For a brief moment, it felt like the nightmare might finally be loosening its grip. That night, he cooked the simplest dinner they had ever eaten, and yet it tasted like survival. Lily fell asleep on the couch beside him, exhausted from fear. Ethan covered her with a thin blanket and watched her breathe for a long time, afraid that looking away would make everything fall apart again. But even in that temporary calm, dread lingered. Deep down, Ethan knew this relief felt too easy, too quiet, too fragile to be real. The illusion shattered the very next morning. Ethan returned to the store to retrieve his final paycheck, desperate for any money he could get. Instead, he was escorted by security straight to the manager's office. Mr. Collins stood there with a smug satisfaction that made Ethan's stomach drop instantly, without hesitation. Colin informed him that his employment was terminated effective immediately, and that due to the ongoing investigation, his final paycheck would be withheld until further notice. Withheld. The word felt unreal. That paycheck was rent. That paycheck was food. That paycheck was survival. Ethan protested. He begged. He reasoned. None of it mattered. Security escorted him out like trash being removed from a building. Once again, phones appeared. Once again, eyes judged. Once again, humiliation returned with doubled force. Outside the building, his phone buzzed endlessly with notifications. The video of his arrest had gone viral overnight. His face was everywhere. Comment sections overflowed with hate, mockery, and condemnation. Criminal, deadbeat, lock him up. The internet had finished the job the city had started. And as Ethan stared at his shaking hands in the parking lot where his life had already been destroyed once, he realized this time the injustice had become absolute. Within 48 hours, everything collapsed at once. The landlord issued a final eviction notice. Services were shut off. Child services returned with more questions, their concern growing sharper with every report they read online. Ethan stood helpless as systems far bigger than him began closing in from every direction. He searched desperately for emergency work, construction, cleaning, delivery, but no one would hire a man whose face was trending as a thief. Even temp agencies turned him away after quick background checks. Doors slammed before he could knock. One by one, hope was systematically erased at night. When Lily was asleep, Ethan sat alone in the dark apartment, calculating impossible numbers again. Except this time, there were no answers left. Only deadlines, only fear, only the terrifying realization that loving his daughter might not be enough to save her from what was coming. For the first time since Sarah's death, Ethan felt himself slipping toward true despair. The kind that doesn't cry, the kind that goes silent, the kind that makes a man wonder if disappearing might be easier than watching his child suffer for his failures. And in that silence, alone on the edge of losing everything, Ethan had no idea that fate was already positioning him for the cruelest test of his life, and the most unbelievable reversal he could never imagine. Ethan sat on the edge of the mattress that night, staring at the cracked wall as if it were asking him questions he no longer knew how to answer. Lily slept curled beside him, her small hand gripping the sleeve of his worn shirt as if even in dreams she feared losing him. He watched her chest rise and fall, and something inside him slowly began to break in a way he hadn't felt since the night Sarah died. For the first time, the thought crossed his mind that maybe he was no longer strong enough to keep fighting. The city had judged him. The law had branded him. The internet had erased him. Every system that was supposed to protect innocent people had turned its back. And now his daughter's future was hanging by a thread he felt too weak to hold. He replayed every decision of the past weeks in his mind like a courtroom verdict on loop. Helping Marcus, being late to work, returning the wrong box. Small moments, ordinary choices, all now twisted into evidence against him by a world that needed a villain. The more he thought, the clearer it became. Logic no longer applied. Only survival did. In the bathroom, he splashed cold water on his face and looked at his reflection under the flickering light. Dark circles under his eyes, jaw clenched by exhaustion. A stranger stared back at him, not the man Lily believed in, not the husband Sarah once loved, and the weight of disappointing both hit him like a physical blow. He whispered apologies into the darkness, not knowing who he was speaking to anymore. To Sarah, to Lily, to the version of himself that once believed effort guaranteed safety. Tears came without sound, slow and heavy, dripping into the sink like quiet admissions of defeat. And in that moment, when the idea of giving up felt dangerously close to becoming real, a soft sound behind him broke the silence. Lily stirring in her sleep, calling his name in a frightened whisper, and pulling him back from the edge. The next morning, Ethan walked Lily to school with shaking legs and a heart that felt hollow. As he turned to leave, the school secretary called out his name. For a split second, fear shot through him again. More questions, more scrutiny, more judgment. Instead, the woman handed him a small envelope with a cautious smile. Inside was a note written in uneven, childlike handwriting. It was from one of Lily's classmates. "My mom says you are brave. This is for food." Tucked behind the note was a folded $20 bill. Ethan stared at it, stunned, his hands trembling as if the money were made of glass. That single gesture shattered something inside him. Not with pain, but with fragile light. Someone out there didn't believe the lies. Someone still saw him as human. He thanked the secretary with a voice that barely held together and walked away before the tears could fall in public. Later that afternoon, a second sign appeared. The homeless outreach center called his phone. Marcus had survived. The man he had helped was stable. And before hanging up, the volunteer added one strange sentence. "He keeps asking about you, says you changed his life." Those words echoed louder than any insult Ethan had ever received. That night, Ethan cooked the smallest meal he had left with the last of the groceries. Lily chewed slowly, smiling as if it were a feast. "We're okay, Daddy," she said softly. And for the first time in days, Ethan felt a dangerous emotion rise again in his chest. Hope. But he had no idea that this tiny flame of hope had already drawn the attention of forces much darker and more powerful than he could imagine. 2 days later, while sitting in the waiting area of a low-income legal clinic, Ethan overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. 2 men across the room whispered urgently about inventory manipulation, framing, and Collins needing a fall guy. One of them even mentioned the exact store where Ethan used to work. Trying not to draw attention, Ethan leaned slightly closer, his heart pounding as the puzzle pieces began shifting in his mind. The men spoke about internal theft rings, upper management pressure, and altered security logs. But just as quickly as the conversation began, the men were called inside and vanished behind the office door. Ethan rushed to the front desk demanding answers, but no one admitted knowledge of the discussion. He left the building shaken, unsure if what he had heard was real, or just desperation playing tricks on his mind. Yet something deep inside told him this wasn't coincidence. That night, he searched the internet obsessively. Dozens of similar cases surfaced, employees framed to protect executives, false footage, manipulated timestamps, corporate silence. His hands trembled as pattern after pattern matched his own nightmare with terrifying accuracy. But there was one detail that terrified him most. In nearly every case, the scapegoat was destroyed long before the truth ever surfaced. And suddenly, Ethan realized he might be running out of time faster than he ever expected. As the pieces continued to clash inside his mind, another image resurfaced. The woman at the gas station. The same woman at the arrest. The same woman at the station the night of his release. The timing no longer felt random. It felt orchestrated. Ethan searched online for days, scanning news articles, corporate reports, and financial databases from local libraries. And then, late one night, he found something that made his heart nearly stop. A public photo from a business gala in Scottsdale showed the woman standing beside the CEO of the very retail company that owned his store. Her name was Victoria Hale, a billionaire investor, a silent partner in multiple national corporations, a woman known for dismantling corrupt systems from the inside before anyone ever saw her coming. And somehow, she had been watching him from the very beginning. The gas station, the parking lot, the bail, none of it was random, which terrified him even more than the accusation. Because if someone that powerful was involved in his life now, it meant the story he had been dragged into was far bigger than theft, and far more dangerous than he was prepared for. And the most disturbing question of all remained unanswered. Why him? With fear overriding caution, Ethan made a decision that would almost destroy everything. Without legal advice, without protection, and without a backup plan, he returned to the store late one night hoping to find proof. The security guard recognized his face instantly but hesitated before calling anyone. That hesitation gave Ethan just enough time to slip into the shadows. Inside the darkened building, his heart hammered as he crept through aisles that once felt ordinary. He searched storage logs, attempted to access terminals he barely understood, and scanned boxes for anything that proved his innocence. But every second inside that building felt like borrowed time. Then the alarms blared. Red lights flooded the warehouse. Doors slammed shut automatically. Security rushed in from every direction. Ethan was tackled to the ground before he could even raise his hands. This time, there would be no misunderstanding. No hesitation. No sympathy. Within hours, the headlines exploded again. Accused thief breaks into store. Any fragile doubt about his innocence vanished from public opinion instantly. The narrative had been rewritten, not as a framed man, but as a criminal caught in the act. And as he sat handcuffed in the back of a police car for the second time, watching his last shreds of credibility burn to ashes, Ethan had no idea that one final betrayal was already forming in the shadows. The betrayal didn't come from a stranger. It came from the one person Ethan still believed might tell the truth. His former coworker, Daniel, the same man who once whispered, "Be careful," was called to testify during the second investigation. Ethan sat behind the glass, watching as Daniel avoided his eyes, his hands shaking as he adjusted the microphone. When Daniel finally spoke, his words cut deeper than the cuffs ever could. He claimed he had seen Ethan near the electronics after closing hours multiple times. He said Ethan had complained about money problems. He said Ethan seemed desperate. Each sentence felt carefully chosen, rehearsed, sharpened for maximum damage. Ethan pressed his hands against the glass in disbelief, shaking his head, silently begging him to stop. The truth was crueler than the lie itself. Daniel owed money to the very theft ring Ethan had stumbled into. He had been threatened, forced, broken long before he ever betrayed Ethan under oath. But none of that mattered now. In the official records, Ethan was no longer just accused. He was now supported by witness testimony. When the hearing ended, Ethan was escorted back into holding. The echo of Daniel's voice followed him like a curse. The last person he thought might help him had just sealed his grave. And in that moment, something inside Ethan finally shattered completely. Because when even the truth turns its back on you, what is left? That night in the cell, the walls felt closer than ever. The air felt thick with despair. Ethan didn't cry. He didn't shout. He simply sat on the cold bench, staring at the floor for hours without moving, as if his spirit had finally stepped out of his body and left him behind. Images of Lily flooded his mind without mercy. Her smile at breakfast, her tiny notes in his lunch bag, her voice when she said, "We're okay, Daddy," and the unbearable truth crushed him from the inside. He was no longer sure that was true. He was no longer sure he could protect her at all. For the first time, the question formed clearly in his mind. Not whispered, not hinted, spoken in full. Would Lily be better off without him? The thought terrified him, shamed him, seduced him with false peace, and he hated himself for even allowing it to exist. He pressed his fists against his eyes as if he could physically erase it, but despair doesn't disappear when you close your eyes. That night, for the first time in his life, Ethan didn't pray for strength, he prayed for the pain to stop, and that scared him more than the prison ever could. After his release on conditional monitoring, everything felt different. People didn't just doubt him now, they avoided him. Neighbors stepped aside when he passed. Store clerks watched him with hostility. Parents pulled their children closer when he walked by. He was no longer invisible. He was marked. Even Lily began to feel it at school. Whispers followed her in the hallways. Playmates were suddenly busy. Birthday invitations stopped coming. One afternoon, she asked him quietly if she had done something wrong. That question broke something in Ethan that might never heal. Friends from the past stopped replying to his messages. Some blocked him. Others left his calls unanswered. The world had made its choice about who he was, and no explanation could change it now. He existed in a permanent court of public opinion with no defense attorney. Ethan began taking longer routes home just to avoid being seen. He kept his head down, his shoulders curved inward with quiet defeat. The man who once fought exhaustion for his daughter now fought humiliation just to walk down the street. And slowly, painfully, people disappeared from his life one by one, leaving behind only the echo of judgment and the heavy silence that followed. The eviction came 2 days later. No courtroom, no negotiation. Just paperwork slid across a desk and a deadline written in cold ink. Ethan packed their lives into 3 worn suitcases under humming fluorescent lights while Lily slept on the floor beside their belongings, clutching her stuffed bear as if it were an anchor to reality. When the door finally closed behind them, Ethan stood in the empty hallway with nowhere to go. No family, no friends, no money, no reputación. Only a child and a future that had collapsed into darkness. They spent the first night in their car beneath a low bridge at the edge of the city. Traffic passed above them like distant thunder. Lily fell asleep with her head in his lap. Ethan stayed awake, staring into the dark, listening to her breathing as if it were the only proof left that life still existed. For the first time since he became a father, he truly felt alone. Not struggling, not poor, not accused, alone. And in that absolute solitude, with nothing left to lose, the silent question rose again. One that felt more dangerous than any accusation. How much more can one man endure before something breaks forever? Change didn't arrive with noise. It arrived with a quiet. Envelope slipped beneath the windshield wiper of his car while he slept. No return address. No explanation. Just a single file inside with legal documents printed in careful detail. Surveillance cross-analysis. Altered timestamps. Financial transfers from shell accounts traced directly to executives inside the company. At the bottom of the last page, a name was signed in elegant script V. Hale. Ethan's hands shook as understanding crashed into him all at once. He wasn't alone anymore. Someone powerful had chosen to step into the darkness beside him. Someone who didn't move loudly, but moved decisively. Later that day, another quiet change followed. A text message from an unknown number. Do not react. Do not confront anyone. Trust the process. You will be tested again. No signature, no explanation. Only a promise wrapped in warning. And as Ethan stared at the message under the fading Arizona sun, he felt something stir inside his chest for the first time in weeks. Not hope, not relief, but something far more dangerous: expectation. Ethan didn't immediately trust the message from the unknown number. After everything he had lost, trust felt like a luxury he could no longer afford. Still, the documents signed by V. Hale were real, too real. They revealed layers of corruption so deep they made his original accusation look tiny by comparison. And yet, he had no legal power, no money, and no safe way to act alone. That changed 3 nights later when a woman approached his car beneath the bridge. He woke to the soft tapping on the window, his heart nearly exploding in his chest. Lily stirred beside him. Panic flooded his body as he reached instinctively for the door lock. Then he heard a calm female voice through the glass. "I'm not here to hurt you. Victoria sent me." Her name was Rachel Myers, a former federal forensic accountant who now worked quietly in the shadows exposing corporate theft. She showed credentials. She showed files. And then she showed proof that the theft ring inside the company extended far beyond Ethan's store. Millions of dollars had vanished through shell accounts over 6 years. Ethan had simply been the easiest fall guy. Rachel explained that Victoria Hale had been investigating the company long before Ethan was framed. The real criminals had grown sloppy and sacrificed him to protect themselves. But now, they had made a fatal mistake by choosing the wrong man at the wrong time. And as Rachel spoke beneath the bridge lights, with traffic roaring above them, Ethan realized that for the first time since his arrest, he wasn't fighting alone anymore. Within days, selected documents began to surface online through anonymous channels. Financial anomalies, hidden transfers, altered footage metadata. Nothing directly naming Ethan yet, but enough to plant doubt in the public conscience. Comment sections began to shift. Something feels off. This smells like corporate framing. The first cracks appeared in the wall that had buried him. Local journalists picked up the story, cautiously at first. A reporter named James Holloway contacted Rachel through encrypted channels. He had followed similar cases years before and recognized the same pattern. For the first time, someone in the media wasn't chasing clicks. They were chasing truth. Ethan watched the news from the front seat of his car, Lily asleep beside him, as doubt replaced certainty on TV anchors' faces. His name was still attached to the word accused, but no longer the word guilty. That distinction, small as it seemed, felt like oxygen after suffocation. But with exposure came danger. Executives began scrambling. Digital trails vanished. Witnesses were quietly relocated. And in the shadows, the theft ring realized their scapegoat was no longer as disposable as they had believed. And that realization always precedes retaliation. As the investigation widened, an unexpected truth emerged from within the financial records, one that struck Ethan with brutal emotional force. A corporate foundation connected to the same company had quietly funded the legal expenses of the man who killed his wife years earlier after the fatal drunk driving accident. The same money trail. The same executives. The same shell accounts. Ethan's breath vanished as the realization crashed through him. The corruption that destroyed his present had also touched his past. The man who shattered his family had been protected. Silently, legally, invisibly, by the same system now trying to bury him alive. Rage, unlike anything he had ever known, flooded his body. This was no longer just about clearing his name. This was about justice delayed for years, about blood paid for with silence, about a system that devoured ordinary families and walked away untouched. Rachel warned him that confronting this truth emotionally could sabotage everything. The case was fragile. One wrong move could collapse years of investigation. But Ethan's hands shook as grief and fury intertwined, threatening to override reason. Because when the past returns with teeth, restraint becomes the hardest battle of all. The test came sooner than expected. One night, as Ethan returned to the bridge after helping Lily wash up at a public shelter, a black SUV blocked their path. Tinted windows, engine idling, silent threat. His instincts screamed danger as two men stepped out calmly, dressed like security, but moving like predators. They offered him a deal, a large cash payment, a new identity, transportation out of state. All charges would quietly disappear. Lily would be taken care of. The implication beneath those words was unmistakable. This was not a gift. This was an erasure. All Ethan had to do was one thing: sign a confession, admit guilt publicly, close the case forever. Rachel's warning echoed in his mind. The investigation, the truth, the lives that could be shattered if he accepted. And yet, Lily stood trembling behind him, gripping his jacket as fear radiated through her tiny body. For the first time, the system didn't threaten him with pain, it tempted him with escape, and that temptation nearly broke him. Ethan looked down at Lily's terrified face, and the answer became clear in silence. If he accepted the deal, he would teach her the most dangerous lesson of all. That truth is something you trade when it becomes inconvenient, and he refused to let that be her inheritance. He tore the offered contract in half. Once, twice, then let the pieces fall at his feet. The men didn't raise their voices. They didn't threaten. They simply nodded as if he had signed his own sentence. "Then you chose the hard way," one of them said quietly, and the SUV vanished into the night as quickly as it had arrived. From that moment forward, the safety net was gone. Rachel confirmed it hours later. The investigation had been accelerated. Court dates moved forward. Media pressure intensified. The theft ring was now fighting for survival, and that meant anything could happen next. But despite the danger closing in from every direction, Ethan felt something return to his chest that had been missing for far too long. His spine straightened, his fear receded, and his identity returned, because for the first time since everything fell apart, he was no longer just surviving, he was standing. And the final battle was now inevitable. The trial exploded across national headlines faster than anyone predicted. Thanks to Rachel's evidence and the leaked documents, federal investigators stormed the company's headquarters at dawn. Servers were seized. Financial officers were detained. Executives disappeared from public view overnight. The same people who once smiled beside Ethan in board meetings now appeared in handcuffs on the evening news. But the greatest shock came when one of the executives cracked under pressure. He confessed. And he named names. Ethan's name was cleared publicly in court before a packed audience. The judge dismissed all charges. The gavel echoed like thunder. And for the first time in years, the word innocent was spoken beside his name. Outside the courthouse, reporters flooded him with microphones. Questions flew. Cameras flashed. All Ethan did was kneel and hug Lily in front of the world. That image went viral within hours. The broken man, the abandoned child, the vindication. It was no longer just a legal victory. It was a human victory. 2 weeks later, fate delivered a twist no one saw coming. Through legal restitution and hidden investment clauses buried within the company's structure, clauses Victoria herself had strategically triggered, Ethan received financial compensation far beyond a typical settlement. Stock shares, frozen assets returned, intellectual property rights tied to systems he had helped build years earlier. The total stunned even the lawyers. $8.7 million. From homeless father to multimillionaire. Not through greed, but through justice. Yet what shocked everyone even more was what Ethan did next. He didn't buy a mansion. He didn't chase luxury. He bought an apartment near Lily's school. He funded the shelter that once protected them. He created a legal support fund for workers who had been framed like him. His wealth didn't change his soul. It revealed it. Power had finally found the right hands. On the night Ethan officially regained his name, Victoria Hale finally revealed everything. They met at a quiet lakeside restaurant far from cameras and crowds. For the first time, there were no intermediaries, just truth. Years earlier, Victoria's younger brother had been killed by corporate negligence, a cover-up buried under settlements and silence. She had dedicated her life to dismantling corrupt systems from within, quietly passing information to auditors, journalists, and whistleblowers. Ethan wasn't chosen randomly. He had unknowingly designed internal controls that made the fraud traceable. When the executives tried to destroy him, Victoria saw an opportunity not just to save an innocent man, but to crush the system that had already taken two families. She had watched him refuse bribes, refuse silence, refuse safety. And that is when she knew he was different. As she stood to leave, Victoria placed one final document in his hands. It was the sealed authorization that had reopened the drunk driving case that killed his wife. The man who destroyed his family would finally face real justice. Not through revenge, through law, through light. 6 months later, the world looked completely different. Lily ran through a backyard filled with sunlight, laughter echoing against the walls of a modest home surrounded by trees. Ethan stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the life he once thought impossible unfold in front of him. Justice had been served. The executives were sentenced. The truth had rewritten history, and the man who killed his wife now awaited trial with no shield left to hide behind. But the greatest victory didn't come from courts or money or headlines. It came one quiet night when Lily climbed into Ethan's lap and asked, "Daddy, are we safe now?" He held her close and answered with the words that once felt unreachable. "Yes, my love, we are safe. The past no longer owned them. The future finally belonged to them, and the broken man beneath the bridge had become something far greater than a survivor. He had become a symbol of what happens when truth refuses to die." The courtroom overflowed long before sunrise. Reporters waited outside, helicopters circled overhead, and millions watched through live broadcasts as the man responsible for Ethan's wife's death was finally brought before a federal judge. For years he had hidden behind wealth, influence, and sealed documents. But not anymore. Victoria sat quietly in the back, watching the trap finally close. Ethan held Lily's hand as the man who destroyed their family was forced to stand and hear the charges. Driving under influence, vehicular manslaughter, evidence tampering, witness intimidation. Each word landed like a hammer. The once powerful figure now trembled, and when the judge denied bail, the room fell silent. Justice was no longer theoretical. It was happening in real time. But Ethan had no idea this was only the beginning. Letters began arriving from everywhere. Strangers who once judged him now apologized. Old co-workers admitted they doubted him. News anchors publicly corrected their accusations from years earlier. Even former executives tried to rewrite their own roles in the scandal. But one letter broke Ethan completely. It was from the first man who had fired him after the theft accusation, the man who started his downfall. Inside were only 3 words: "I was wrong. Forgive me." Ethan read it alone in the kitchen, hands shaking. For years, the world had crushed him without mercy. Now it finally knelt. Yet forgiveness would not come easily. What happened next would test his heart in ways money never could. One morning, Victoria was gone. No messages, no calls, no security trace. Her bank activity stopped. Her networks went silent. The woman who had dismantled an empire vanished as if she had never existed. Authorities suspected retaliation from remaining corporate interests. Others whispered she had staged her disappearance to protect herself. Ethan felt the same cold fear he felt the night his life collapsed the first time. He owed her everything. And now she was gone as he prepared to search for her, ignoring all danger. A single encrypted email arrived with no sender ID. 4 words glowed on the screen. They are still watching. The warning came too late. Late one night, Ethan found his front door open. Nothing stolen, nothing damaged. Except a photo pinned to Lily's bedroom wall. It was a picture of the old bridge where he once lived. On the back, 2 words were written in red. Remember us? The message was clear. Someone from the old power structure hadn't fallen. They had survived, and they were angry. For the first time since winning everything back, Ethan realized the truth. He had defeated the system, but not all the monsters inside it. And now he had something far more valuable to protect. Months later, Victoria reappeared as quietly as she had vanished. She had gone underground to dismantle the final network connected to the corporation's shadow operations. Dozens of arrests followed her return. International assets were frozen. Shell companies collapsed overnight. This time, nothing remained hidden. The war was finally over. Ethan stood beside Victoria at the opening of the Hale Turner Justice Foundation, created to protect whistleblowers, wrongfully accused workers, and families destroyed by corporate crimes. Lily cut the ribbon with a smile that carried no fear. Ethan looked at the sky and felt something he had not felt in over a decade: peace. The story that began under a bridge ended with a legacy that would protect thousands, and the world would never forget the poor single father who faced hell and walked out carrying justice in his hands. Fame didn't feel like a blessing at first. Everywhere Ethan went, cameras followed. Strangers asked for photos. Reporters camped outside his home. Influencers turned his suffering into content. His pain became entertainment for the world. And Lily began to notice that at school, classmates pointed at her. Teachers treated her differently. Parents whispered. She was no longer just a child. She was the daughter of the famous innocent man. One night, Lily asked quietly, "Daddy, do they love us or our story?" The question crushed him. For the first time since escaping poverty, Ethan felt trapped again. But this time, the cage was made of applause, and it was tightening. One afternoon, Lily came home shaking. A boy at school, the same one who once mocked her when she was poor, had now tried to befriend her, not out of kindness, out of fame. That he wanted videos, followers, attention. When Ethan confronted the boy's parents, they laughed it off. "Relax, it's good exposure." That night, Ethan sat alone in the dark living room, watching Lily sleep. Money had saved their bodies, but it had not yet protected their hearts. And at that moment, everything started to change. Ethan received an offer that could multiply his fortune tenfold. A public media empire wanted exclusive rights to his story. Movies, series, merchandise, global fame. The check was obscene. Victoria warned him, "Stories like yours, they sell souls." That night, Ethan stood in the backyard, staring at the stars with Lily beside him. She asked one simple thing, "Daddy, do we have to be famous to be happy?" Ethan realized the truth in silence. This battle wasn't against corporations. It was against temptation, and the wrong decision here could destroy everything he had rebuilt. The next morning, Ethan refused the contract. The media turned instantly. Overnight, praise became criticism. He's ungrateful. He's hiding something. He thinks he's better than us. Sponsors vanished. Public support wavered. The same crowd that once lifted him now questioned his character again. History tried to repeat itself, but this time, Ethan did not bend. He did not defend. He simply lived quietly and waited for truth to do what it always does: return. Years passed, no scandals, no cameras, no noise, only life. Lily grew strong, kind, and fearless. She became a law student, inspired by the truth that once saved her family. Victoria aged quietly in peace. The foundation expanded across multiple states, and Ethan opened a small workshop for men who had lost everything like he once had. He taught skills, he offered second chances, he never told his story. One day, a young homeless father stood at his door with a child in his arms. Ethan smiled and welcomed him inside. The world never made a movie about this ending, but this was the truest victory of all. This story is not just about a single father falsely accused of a crime he did not commit. It is about what happens when the world breaks a person and that person refuses to become what hurt them. The easiest path for Ethan would have been hatred. The simplest choice would have been to give up. The most natural reaction would have been to turn his pain into bitterness and his wounds into cruelty. But instead, he chose to remain human when the world had stopped being kind. He lost his wife, his job, his reputation, his home, and nearly his faith. But through every loss, he never lost his character. Life did not make him strong. It revealed that he already was. Because pain does not create evil inside people. It only exposes what was already there, and in rare souls, it exposes a strength so deep that suffering cannot corrupt it. There is a moment in every life when survival feels heavier than hope, when tomorrow feels too distant and yesterday feels too painful to carry. When Ethan lived under that bridge, he was not only poor in money, he was poor in prospects, poor in peace, poor in belief that anything good could still be waiting for him. And yet, even at his lowest, he was still a father. And that single truth gave him a reason to wake up each morning when the world had given him every excuse not to. The greatest poverty is not the lack of money. It is the absence of purpose. Many people today have comfort, food, and shelter, yet they wake up empty because they no longer know why they are still fighting. Ethan fought because a child depended on him, and sometimes that is all it takes for a broken soul to stay alive. The world is fast to judge and painfully slow to apologize. When the accusation came, people turned their backs without hearing his side. Doors closed. Friends disappeared. Employers erased his name. The lie traveled faster than the truth ever could. And when justice finally arrived, apologies came quietly, in letters, in whispers, in private confessions that could never undo years of humiliation and loss. The world will often destroy you in public and ask for forgiveness in private. And healing from that kind of wound takes longer than any court case ever could. Not every miracle arrives with the face of safety. Sometimes help comes dressed as discomfort, as doubt, as uncertainty. Victoria did not appear as a savior. She arrived as a mystery, as a risk, as a question with no clear answer. And yet, she became the turning point of an entire destiny. Many people miss their transformation because they reject the door that does not look like a blessing. Sometimes the very thing that feels dangerous is the thing that was sent to change everything. When the money finally came, it proved something many people never understand. Wealth changes circumstances, but it does not change the soul. Ethan could have chosen revenge, luxury, and silence. He could have disappeared into comfort and forgotten the world that had abandoned him. Instead, he chose responsibility. He chose to lift others. He chose to build instead of boast. Money did not transform him. It revealed who he had always been when no one was watching. Justice itself does not need revenge. Revenge makes noise. Justice moves in silence and leaves consequences behind. Ethan did not destroy his enemies with his own hands. He stood still and allowed truth to do what it has always done over time. Lies collapse under their own weight. Masks fall on their own. And those who live by deception eventually face the emptiness they created for others. The greatest victory of his life was not the fortune he received, not the headlines that cleared his name, and not even the final convictions of those who had destroyed him. The greatest victory arrived quietly in a child's voice asking a simple question in the safety of their home. "Daddy, are we safe now?" And for the first time in years, he could answer without fear. Peace became his real reward, and peace is the only success that cannot be stolen in the end. His legacy was not measured in buildings, foundations, or numbers in a bank account. His legacy revealed itself the day another broken father stood at his door, holding a child with the same fear in his eyes that Ethan once carried. The circle closed in that moment. He had become the help he once prayed for. And that is how true victory is born. You only win for real when you become the answer to someone else's despair. This story is not only about Ethan. It is about anyone who has been crushed by life and still stands. Anyone who has been judged without being heard. Anyone who has lost everything and wonders if starting again is even possible. Life does not break people to destroy them. Sometimes it breaks them to reveal who they truly are. The world tried to bury Ethan beneath lies, pain, and injustice, but it failed to realize one thing. He was not meant to be buried. He was a seed, and when the light finally reached him, he rose. If this story touched your heart even a little, if at any moment you felt your chest tighten, your eyes burn, or your mind drift into your own struggles, then this channel is not just another place on YouTube for you. It is a place for people who still believe that pain can turn into purpose, that injustice doesn't get the final word, and that broken lives can still be rebuilt piece by piece. By subscribing, you are not just supporting a channel. You are joining a community of people who understand that behind every ruin there is a story waiting to rise, and behind every silence there is a truth waiting to be heard. Every single week, a new story will meet you right here. Stories of ordinary people facing impossible situations. Stories of betrayal, loss, faith, fear, courage, and redemption. Stories that will make you think, make you feel, and sometimes even make you cry, but always leave you stronger than before. And if one story was powerful enough to keep you here until this moment, imagine what the next one can change inside you. So before you close this video, before you scroll to the next distraction, take 1 second to make a decision that can follow you for months, maybe even years. Click the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and promise yourself that you will not miss the next story that might speak directly to your life at the exact moment you need it. Because maybe you didn't find this video by accident. Maybe it arrived in your life at the exact second your heart needed hope, strength, or a reminder that you are not alone in this fight. And if you stay with us, we promise to keep bringing you stories that remind you of exactly that. Subscribe now, not just for the stories, but for the strength they leave behind.